For the first time since World War II, polls in Germany predict that a far-right party will enter parliament. I'm Malika Bilal.
Who are the Alternative for Deutschland, or AfD, and what impact will they have on German politics? I'm Dan Ming, and you're in the stream, live on Al Jazeera and YouTube. The German political landscape is shifting. Smaller parties are peeling away supporters from the country's largest political parties. Perhaps most surprising is that the far-right AfD is set to enter the Bundestag, or national parliament, for the first time. They've been growing in popularity since Chancellor Angela Merkel opened Germany's doors to Syrian refugees 2 years ago.
That's right. The AfD has made a name for itself with a raft of anti-immigrant and anti-Islam policies. Take a look at some posters that are affiliated with their campaign. New Germans, we'll make them ourselves. Burqas, we step out in bikinis. And Islam doesn't fit in with our cuisine.
Alexander Gauland, a top leader in the AfD, recently said this about Germany's Nazi past.
Ja, wir haben uns mit den Verbrechen der 12 Jahre auseinandergesetzt.
Yes, we have dealt with the crimes of those 12 years. And dear friends, if I look around Europe, no other people has dealt as clearly with their past wrongs as the Germans. People no longer need to reproach us with these 12 years. They don't relate to our identity nowadays, and we are prepared to say so.
Well, despite comments like that, some say it's not only those with extreme views who will vote AfD. So here to help us explore this story.
Not all AfD voters are right-wing extremists. That's totally clear. However, I believe that the party leadership are right-wing extremists, and that's the problem. There are disappointed CDU voters, conservatives who don't feel that they are taken seriously enough within the CDU, nationalist conservatives.
Joining us for today's conversation in Berlin, Daniel Drepper is editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed Germany. Juan Carlos Medina is a data scientist at the Technical University in Munich. In Hamburg, Christoph Giza is the author of a book on the AfD. Also in Berlin, Lauren Ballhorn is a contributing editor of Jacobin magazine. Now, we also invited AfD members and supporters, but they declined to join the conversation. So welcome everyone to the stream. Now, I want to start here on my laptop with this headline. Just came out in the last 24 hours. Polls suggest a jump in German far-right parties' support. Now, the latest polls show the AfD securing a 10 to 12% of the vote, and that's up from 8 to 10%. But the question, Daniel, is how did the Alternative for Germany get to a point where they're poised to enter parliament for the first time and potentially become the third largest party?
So I think they really capitalized on the problems that people had with like immigrant and migrant policies, like people who already felt like they are not getting their share, that they are in a bad position, like economically maybe, or they are fearing that they might be worse off economically in the future, and were frustrated with like political parties who are pretty close to each other in Germany. It's not like a real big debate. It's not like aggressive discussions like in the US or in other countries. It's like, it's pretty civilized and pretty close to each other. They were like angry already, and then they had something to rally behind, probably. And the AfD is pretty smart in getting people behind their policies, getting people angry, getting people frustrated. They're really good at like getting frustration of people into their making them vote for them. Especially
Can you give us an example,
Daniel?
Give us an example of what that looks like.
Yeah. So AfD like uses, for example, online a lot of ads and a lot of campaign things and a lot of Facebook postings that try to capitalize on stuff and like distorting the facts a little bit. Like, for example, a few days ago, like in Germany, Oktoberfest, like the big beer festival in Munich started, and the AfD used a picture of like really early in the morning where nobody was there, and then they wrote below it like as a caption, "Oh, see, you can't even celebrate Oktoberfest anymore because everyone is afraid of the terrorists and the Muslims." And that was like a plain lie, because in the like midday and in the afternoon, obviously Oktoberfest was full of people. So they use this kind of things to like rally and get people like really angry about stuff.
So one thing we're hearing is that the outcome of the whole election as a whole seems somewhat predictable, at least according to recent polling. But we got this tweet, and I want to read it for you, Lauren. Take a look. 5 Personen said, "I'm in Germany, and I'm afraid that these are the most boring, but also most dangerous elections." She elaborated. She says, boring in terms of campaign. There is no real challenge for Merkel. Same time, a lot of people are angry and will vote for the AfD. It's boiling under the surface. So, Lauren, would you agree with that? Do you think that there's something dangerous to their increase in support?
Yeah. I mean, of course, whenever, a far-right party that is openly racist and plays with violent motifs is always dangerous for a society. But I also think that the tweet is correct that the campaign is boring. And I think that's the second sort of structural element that you have to look at to understand why the AfD is able to do what it's doing, is that the campaign is boring and that there has been a convergence towards what you could call the radical center or the extreme center, and that the major parties, particularly the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats, really don't differ very much in terms of campaign promises. And Merkel's entire campaign is kind of built around an idea that Germany's never had as good of a situation as it does now. But that's really only true for one part of society, right? For like maybe the upper 20, 30%, whereas for the overwhelming majority of Germans, wages have been declining for almost 2 decades at this point. There's a lot of job growth, but it's mostly precarious, part-time, and short-term employment. But none of this is reflected in the rhetoric of Angela Merkel. And I think that doesn't excuse the racism of the AfD. Of course, the AfD is taking these concerns and channeling them in a racist direction. But I think without also discussing that, you can't really understand why there's a position on both sides, not only on the right, but also on the left.
So, Lauren, I want to make sure I'm getting you right. Are you saying that this is less about a rise of a far-right party and more about perhaps a decline in the centrist parties, that they are not doing enough to reach out to people who then might find solace in the arms of a far-right party?
Well, I mean, I think it's both, right? I mean, before the AfD emerged, we had 10 years ago the emergence of the left party, Die Linke, which was an expression of deep dissatisfaction in a part of the Social Democrats' voting base. I think a similar thing, and of course the specifics are much different, but a similar process is now occurring on the right side of German politics, where the Christian Democrats' traditional monopoly on nationalism and right-wing themes has been lost, and a new political actor has emerged that is also expanding the borders or the definitions of what is acceptable in mainstream German politics. But I'm not convinced that it reflects a massive groundswell of far-right supporters or far-right activists in German society, but just rather that the political system is changing as the CDU fails to maintain its grip on its right wing for various reasons. And obviously the refugee movement has given it a visible representation that maybe the AfD can channel this discontent towards. But the sort of the material reasons for that, the economic situation, the collapse of the political center, is a much longer process.
So I want to ask about the divisions within Germany and whether they fall along geographic lines. Daniel, take a look at this tweet from Afronaut. She says, "As an Afro-German person, the current political climate doesn't surprise me. It's a repetition of the events after reunification." And then she added, "Most white Germans, especially in provincial areas in the former GDR, do not hide their xenophobic, racist attitudes." So Daniel, do you think that there's a regional division within the country?
So you can definitely see, especially, for example, in state elections, that like the AfD and right-wing parties in general get like a high percentage in Eastern German states. So they are more, they also get like high percentages in some like economically not so well off areas in the west of Germany, but most of their base is in the eastern part of Germany, definitely. And because she said, like, you see something that you already saw after reunification, like 2 decades ago. That's definitely partly true, because you had, like, in the early 90s, like real, like some kind of uprisings and like people burning down refugee shelters and stuff like that, and even refugees dying from like attacks. And this is like what happened over the last 2 years is pretty much the biggest aggression against like migrants that has been happening in Germany for like 20 years now. And I think the AfD is like what Lauren said before, like capitalizing on like a shift in the political system in Germany, and like a lot of people who are not happy with like being in like precarious jobs and stuff like that. But also they are really good at like getting everyone who has been a little bit more racist before and maybe has voted for the NPD, like the really right-wing nationalist party who has been successful a few years ago. They're getting them. They're getting all the people who were kind of racist but didn't really know whom to vote for, and getting the economically frustrated, I think.
So, and giving us that description, I actually want to talk to someone who is a supporter. Have a listen to someone who spoke to Jazeera about why they are supporting the AfD. Have a look.
The AfD takes on political themes which the other parties have woefully neglected in the last years. And because I am convinced that the political system has moved so much to the left, and that the AfD is now filling that gap, for that reason I have found my political homeland here.
So Juan Carlos, he talks about finding his political homeland. One of those homelands for some supporters is online. Take a look at this headline here. Right-wing activists take aim at German election. This is via Der Spiegel online. One of the places that people seem to be gathering is in this online space, which if you're outside of Germany isn't so significant because we've seen that in other elections. But tell us about why it's significant here and what it looks like.
Okay, it's definitely significant here because we haven't seen this before on the internet. What we're doing, we're focusing on finding what are the trends in Twitter, in Facebook, especially of these right-wing parties, and how they influence elections. So one thing to know is that the normal elections that were held 4 years ago will be very different to the ones that will be held here in Germany in 4 years. And this is a lot of effort, and what is happening in social media and social spaces. These are places where a lot of supporters of the AfD are gathering, also of the alt-right, and we have seen some correlations there by doing some analysis on the data that we have on the Twitter elections.
Mm-hmm. So, Christoph, I know that you're joining us via the phone. We got a comment live on YouTube. This is from Josh Perry, who says, do Germany's famed hate speech laws have any clout against the obviously Islamophobic advertising used by AfD that you highlighted off the top of the show? So, of course, we saw some of those campaign pictures, and I know, Dan, there are members of our community that are talking about that as well. Yeah. But, Christoph, is there a norm that's being shattered here? Because those posters and some of this rhetoric that we're seeing is not something that outsiders would think of when they think of Germany post-World War II?
First, I'm sorry, I really don't know what happened. My connection was down. I really didn't get the question 100%.
That's okay.
The question? Is it surprising what happened?
Yes, and is AfD challenging a taboo in Germany on nationalism and on right-wing politics and how acceptable that is in society?
Well, I think every society has a certain percentage of people that have this kinds of thoughts. But what AfD brings in is they come from a side that doesn't look like the typical Nazi supporters. You know, they don't look like Adolf Hitler supporters, and they bring in a very well-connected social media campaign. They bring in money from somewhere outside the country, and nobody knows by now where the money comes from. And they bring in a new marketing and PR concept. And actually, what they are doing and how they are challenging the political system, but also the journalists, is that nobody was prepared for that. You know, we knew how a typical Nazi or neo-Nazi looks like, but we haven't been prepared to deal with someone who looks like completely normal and brings in this kind of ideas in a completely new way, new marketing.
So talking about the coverage that the AfD is getting, Daniel, take a look at this tweet. So we tweeted out the posters that the AfD has been putting out, you know, to shock and stir up conversation.
And that we can see right
and
behind you
they're all
as we
around us
speak.
here on the set. We got this tweet from Mahi. She says, same as UKIP's Breaking Point poster, such juvenile and intolerant ads get made because they shock us into talking about marginal parties. So Daniel, do you think that the AfD has successfully gained disproportionate coverage because of things like this?
Yeah, I think every time you report on the AfD, like people keep telling you, why do you report on them? You just help them, you give them more votes in the elections. And I see why people say that, and like especially in the US, like there's been a lot of analysis that like Trump really was really good at like triggering the media. But on the other side, I think first my job is not like getting votes to SPD or CDU. My job is like to report on stuff that seems important, that people are interested in. And then the second thought I think was really important is that like there is a lot of stuff about the AfD that is actually newsworthy. Like for example, the speech that you saw from Alexander Gauland where he said like, oh, we can be proud of the accomplishment that we have in like 12 years in both world wars. Like we found that speech on the internet, no one had reported on it, so we dug it up and like reported on it and spread it, and it went viral because it is actually something that like shows how racist and how right-wing and how extreme the party leaders are. And I think obviously like this might help them with some people because they think, oh, they are saying what no one else says and whatever. But this is not something that I, as a journalist, like should make my first thought before reporting anything.
I wanted to bring up this comment here. Go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, I just wanted to say really quick about the question of whether the AfD is breaking certain taboos. I think that, and actually the clip that you showed from the AfD supporter who said he felt like the country had moved so far to the left. I mean, I don't think that's true that the country's really moved to the left. But Angela Merkel has certainly moved the CDU quite far to the center on numerous issues. I think the best example and most recent one would be, although she didn't formally support it, she permitted the parliament to pass a marriage, a same-sex marriage law. So I think there is, for a certain section of the right wing of the Christian Democratic voting base, a feeling that their party has abandoned them. And, you know, the people that you showed clips of, Alexander Gauland, next to him was Bernd Lucke, who's no longer in the party, but another party co-founder, Konrad Adam. These are all former Christian Democrats and high-ranking Christian Democrats. These aren't neo-Nazis. This is a part of German society that's always existed, but was kept under control by the Christian Democrats.
If I may interrupt you, the thing is, if you read books from Alexander Gauland back in 2002, so 15 years ago, you can already find all the thoughts you hear now in those books. Nobody read them at that time because he wasn't as important as he wants people to believe he was in the CDU. But he was basically what you hear from him now, it's a Nazi, but at least he was far right. He was anti-democrat already back in 2000. And the thing is, the preparation for the founding of this party started long before the Euro crisis and also before the refugee crisis. They were waiting for a subject they could use to gain hold inside the population. But they were there 15 years ago. You just have to read what they wrote at that time.
So, Christoph, I hear what you're saying, and because, of course, we are talking about Alexander Gauland, who the party, of course, has declined an invitation to join this show, I want you to take a look at what he told supporters in early September. Have a look.
And that is why, dear friends, we have the right to not only reclaim our country, but to reclaim our past. If the French are rightly proud of their emperor and the Britons of Nelson and Churchill, we have the right to be proud of the achievements of the German soldiers in 2 world wars.
So, of course, they dispute comparisons with Nazis. So that's their official on-the-record kind of stance. But, Dan, you can see from that clip why some people might be worried.
And people are wondering whether or not this party is having influence just from the sidelines, even without being in government yet. We got this tweet from Kaj, and Lauren, I want to read it for you. Kaj says, Merkel doesn't want to make refugees the #1 issue in the minds of voters, a campaign issue so as not to feed the AfD beast. Lauren, we've seen that Germany has already reduced the number of refugee admissions in recent years. Do you think that this represents a kind of shift to cater to people who are concerned about this?
You mean on Merkel's part?
Sorry?
On Merkel's part, a shift on Merkel's part.
Yes, on Merkel's part.
Yeah, sure. I mean, she has repeated multiple times that, she basically says something along the lines of, we wouldn't repeat 2015, I would have done some things differently. I think more important than any rhetorical shift is, cutting deals with the Turkish state and other fairly unsavory regimes outside of Europe's borders in order to stop refugees from reaching, European shores in the first place. I think that's her real long-term plan, is to keep them out, and not just keep them out of Germany, but keep them out of Europe as a whole. In the meantime, her campaign is largely centered around the fact that she's stable, that everyone knows what to expect with her, that, Germany's boat isn't rocking despite everything going on around it. Yeah, it's very much it's a status quo campaign. There's no big promise about the future. She doesn't want to talk about any problems. It's just hoping that German voters will be so scared based on what's happening to the rest of Europe that they'll cling to the center.
And so she and other lawmakers have already said or are expected to shun the AfD if they do make it into parliament. But here's what Beatrice, she's a former AJ Stream co-worker of ours, she tweets in. She says, these are constant reminders of what extremist ideologies might be seriously discussed in parliament next year. Interested in seeing the turnout and what that actually looks like is something like this headline: German Nationalist Party presents anti-Islam platform. And we've talked about that and referenced it earlier in this program. Daniel, what do you think we can expect if they are to make it into parliament?
So I don't think that any party will officially work with them. Obviously, in the national parliament, you already said that. But when you look at the state parliaments all over Germany, the AfD already is in a few state parliaments, in a number of state parliaments, and they are not in any form of government. Nobody's forming a coalition with them. But you had a few recent examples, for example, in the state of Saxony, I think, where the CDU, although being in a coalition with other parties, lined themselves together with AfD, decided together with AfD to support a motion and bring through some form of motion together with AfD members of the state parliament. So I think I don't know where this will lead, but I definitely think that there will be some form of normalization once they are in the parliament and work in the government institutions.
So we got this tweet from Julia, and Christoph, I'd like to get your take on it. She says, the most up-to-date polling shows the official opposition will be the AfD, or the socialist left-leaning people should see this and vote Die Linke. Christoph, do you think that people will coalesce around another third party?
Oh, that's a good question. To be honest, I wouldn't think. It's not in the hands of the AfD. To be honest, what will be happening the next years? It's in the hand of the other parties, and it's in the hand of also the press and civil society, because they will try to play their game, keep on playing their game. But the thing is, it's still, even if they make 12%, it's maybe 3.5, 4 million Germans. And there's another 40, 45 million not voting for those guys. And the other 40 or 45 million really don't want to have anything to do with the AfD guys. So I think it's the normalization, if you want to call it like that, should be that we understand that there's a certain percentage of people in the country that is like that, and we should know how to deal with that, but we shouldn't let them set the agenda. And also, when we're discussing this, we still have to remind the people that watch the show right now, there's going to be a nationalist, a racist, Islamophobic party in the parliament, yes, but they will not be running the government.
Christoph, a reminder to all of our audience, thank you for leaving us with that point, and thank you to all of our guests for joining us today. That's all the time we have. But the conversation continues online with #AJStream. Thanks for watching.